Thank you, Pavani and TRW team for having us today. It's wonderful to start off this week with a conversation that's close to our hearts and it's been happening for some time. And everyone, thank you for joining us today evening. Just want to set some context and then three of us can start sharing where we're coming from. One thing I want to say is today's conversation is about the difficulty of being dharmic. And this has a certain amount of history to it. It's not something we came up with this year. We've been talking about it for a few years now. In fact, if I remember, we started having conversations in 2020. In fact, Preeti and Raghu started some of the questions that were burning, and then they kind of pulled some of us together who were also holding the same questions. And we met almost every single week to discuss what it meant. And at that point in time, really the context was the conflicts we were seeing in the country and how it was escalating. A part of also the question was, at least for me, I was getting to know our, the Indic wisdom, discovering our culture. And at the same time, owning up your culture seemed to have its own challenges. And I did not understand that. So all of us were coming from different paths where this question had to be deeply looked at. What does it mean to understand your identity, own your identity, and hold it in such a way that we can live in synchronicity with this world? So I think today what we have set to do is really share our journeys and where we have come and what we look to do going forward. So that's what today's evening is going to be. And like Preeti said, as we are speaking, if something comes up for you, if you want to ask any questions, feel free to put up your hand and join the conversations. Some of you I know have been in the Manthans with us, so you probably already have some introduction to this topic. So feel free to come in and share your views or ask your questions as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Maggie. And maybe Raghu, you and I could also possibly share where we are coming from in this moment to warm up the room and to give everybody a sense of why this topic is important to us.
Yeah, sure. You want to go first, Preeti?
Sure. Yes, of course. So I think it was 2 years back or 3 years back that we were invited to facilitate a conversation. And I remember that I'd heard about Raghu, I'd never met. Well, actually, I've never met Raghu in person even now, though I believe that I have. And the reason it was compelling for me to engage in this conversation with Raghu at that time, as it is even today, is this whole idea of colonization and what it means to me. How does it frame my identity? And I speak about my identity as a thoroughbred Indian woman who gets mistaken as not so Indian. And I found a lot of times I sat within my own community being treated like I had some sort of Western stuff happening. And then in the Western world, I was too Eastern to be Western. And thus living somewhere in between and trying to recognize and frame what that meant. And here's the interesting part, that for the longest time, I accepted it even though it disturbed me. And I had to come to this place of deep inner dialogue and then come to the Manthan with Raghu to say, all right, enough is enough. We need to excavate this problem, understand what it is, draw and glean the wisdom out of it, and actually unpack it in more ways than one. And that's what I believe has happened for us in different ways. I do believe that I come today with, I don't think a much better understanding, but I do come with greater understanding of, should I say, the Indic framework of our reality. And there are some questions that I have which will further answer my own perspectives as we get into dialogue with both Raghu and with Maggie. But needless to say that this is personal. And it's also about all of us together, collectively. Raghu, over to you.
Thanks, yeah. I'm just going back. Now listening to you and Maggie, to where we started and before that even, na? Because one of the things that I just, this is very important for me, is that just when I was finishing college, I met up with a very interesting person who really changed the course of my life. And this was a person called Dharampalji. The unfortunate thing is most people don't know about him. And it's very interesting why people don't know about him. So I think I must share with you a little bit about him and encourage all of you to read his work. He was a Gandhian, and apart from having been very involved in the pre-independence movement, when we got our independence, he, along with Mira Ben, Mira Ben will be more recognizable for people because she's a Westerner who came and joined the Varda ashram. Anyway, the two of them were asked to study the panchayat system. So when Dharampalji went around, he discovered that there were two Indias. One was the India that got independence, and then there was Bharat. And there's a very interesting, there are lots of stories he's talked about. This one he's written about, where he was traveling from Delhi to Chennai, to Madras at that time. And along with him in the compartment, there was a whole group of people from Rajasthan who were going to Rameshwaram. And two or three things struck him. One was these were people from the same village across the board. We're all taught that there are all these caste differences and caste hierarchies and all that. So when he started talking to them, they were very casual about it. He said, yeah, at work, there are these differences, but when we are in a pilgrimage, we're all from the same village. So we come here, we share, we go to different places. Every 2-3 years, we have to go on a pilgrimage. So that's what we're doing. And what he was struck by was they were not going to stop in Madras. They were just taking a train and going straight to Rameshwaram. So he said, why? And don't you know about Indian independence? They kind of vaguely said, yeah, hey, there's something called Indian independence. It's not important for us. Going to Rameshwaram is much more meaningful than going to India. Right? And whatever, there are several such examples he talks about. And then finally, he went up to Nehru and said, your education policy and your panchayat policy are completely wrong. You're going to destroy the fabric of India by doing this. Because Gandhiji had spoken earlier about what he called the golden tree, the beautiful tree, which had to do with Indian institutions. And he had said that the British are uprooting the beautiful tree. So Nehru, of course, got very angry with him and wanted to put him in jail. Yeah, the champion of free speech. But the moment somebody said he don't like what he's doing, he's going after him. So some of Dharampalji's friends sent him off to England. And he then spent around 10 years or so, if I'm not mistaken, studying what happened to India from 1740, 1750, just when the British came, all the way to 1850. And from British records, and traced the entire process of how India was looked at, what happened, what is the colonizing process, and so on. It's a brilliant set of stuff that he's written, and it's available, called Essential Works of Dharampalji. And guess what? The leftist historians in India simply attacked his work and wouldn't allow it to become a part of any study. Yeah, it's only now getting revived, and luckily some people it has been very alive in the Gandhi ashram and so on. So this really shifted my entire course. And he challenged us saying, if you want to make India great, go and study with a great master for at least 10 years and don't come back and tell me how great India is. Tell me what there is in our tradition that can be used to solve today's problems. Yeah. And one of the things that I'd been confronting right through was what I took for granted, that Indians would be interested in understanding what is India. I was completely mistaken. Yeah. And I'm sure Preeti and all will remember the first conversation we had when Nilima said, come and do this. We said, yeah. Very happy. And we had 4-5 of us, Sukhi and all. And we started off, what India is colonized, and we thought other people would understand. And the kind of opposition we had was incredible. Yeah. There were people in the group from all sections of India. So we finally said, sorry, we made a mistake by accepting Nilima's invitation. So that's when we went on to this thing. We said, look, if you're interested, we're going to do a long dialogue because we understand that we don't understand the problem. So that's how this whole thing started. When right through COVID, we would meet once a week and so on. There were about 15, 20 people on an average who came repeatedly, people from across the board. There were people from various, whatever you mentioned, there were writers, there were leftists, there were people from LGBT community, there were people from who were left, right, straight, crooked, everything. Yeah. So it was it was really, really exciting. And we started off by calling it the difficulty of being Hindu. Then we said, I don't know how exactly it happened. Do you remember, Maggie? How did we change to difficulty of being Dharmic?
When we said let's take it to the larger audience, because the difficulty of being Hindu, we primarily had people from the Hindu faith. We were sitting and talking about the difficulty of owning up to our own identity and how is it perceived. When we wanted to open it up and bring in more people, we said, okay, what really we are talking about is even deeper than a name for the faith. It's how do you hold who you are, your identity, your roots, plus your faith, and how do you hold all of these things together is when we said, okay, let's call it difficulty of being Dharmic. I think after 2 years, I think for first 2 years, we just called it difficulty of being Hindu. 2 years, we just stayed with that topic.
And all
I think
kinds
we also
came
recognized
for our dialogues in any case, no? Whether it's made a big difference making a change in the name. Yes, Preeti?
I said we also made the change to difficulty of being Dharmic from difficulty of being Hindu, from the perspective that actually Dharma defines Sanatan Dharma.
Yeah.
And that was really going back to saying, what are the principles that guide what we now call our faith? And those principles are essentially more critical than anything else. Can we speak to those? And they're good for all. They're not restricted to just being Hindu.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing I think we ended up was we had to keep on explaining the word Hindu.
That's
The
right.
word Hindu does not belong to us. That's not the way we define ourselves. And like words like faith don't really apply to the way we look at ourselves and all of that. And the more we explained and the more we explored, the more it became apparent how deeply we are colonized and how we don't even recognize that we are colonized. And what is happening because of that? Because the consequences of being colonized is in itself quite severe, but not even recognizing that you're colonized, I think, is even more severe. So that's what came through very strongly. And like Preeti was saying, while in most other nations, now when you go into a settler colony, it's very clear, who are the Maoris and who are the whites who came and conquered and took over the place and what happened and all of that. But when you read, people like Tuhiwai Smith or all these Maoris who are waking up and talking about colonization, you recognize, what, it sounds like us, but it's not completely sounding like us, no? Lots of things that they're speaking about, they're very clear, me versus you. They're very clear who are the Maoris, right? And many of them have tattoos even, no? So you can't mistake a Maori, yeah, or a Native American from the settlers. Well, the I versus you for them is very clear. And also, I versus you is not dharmic. So when we were exploring the whole thing, sorry, yeah, there's a little bit of rain here and the current has just gone off. Huh?
Okay.
So I'm in a red glow, okay? It's interesting that the red glow came up just at the time when I was talking about the real difficulty. So the real difficulty is that, like what Preeti was saying, we are brown. And brown is something very, very different from being black or white. And through the couple of years of our dialogue, this really came through very sharply. What does it mean to be in between? And how have we internalized whiteness? How have we tried to resist it? And what happens in this process, right? And I think if you're black and whatever, I'm assuming, I don't know. I think it'll be easier because you know who the enemy is. Or you know who you're talking about and you know what it means. But when you're brown, you're really caught in between. And then it's very difficult to really own up to things and work with them.
Raghu, I have a story to tell to your point. I remember this about 15, 16 years back. There was this diversity exercise where there were, I was in the US. My batch of, or the cohort of people that I was working with were white and black, and I was the only Asian, so to speak. Most certainly the only Indian in the room. And the exercise basically says, if you have a trust fund, take a step forward. If you grew up taking care of your younger siblings, take a step back. And the room essentially through a list of questions gets divided. And as the room is divided, you see the one part of the room is all white and the other part of the room is all black. And then there was one Preeti who was in the middle.
Wow.
Wow.
And I remember standing there and saying, should I just disappear? Should I just sort of evaporate and stand to a side, because these guys are going to have a dialogue and they're not going to get along with each other. And we had a very good facilitator, and she saw my dilemma and she said, well, where do you stand? I said, well, clearly in the middle. And I said, my question to both sides is, where do you see me? And the whites saw me with the blacks and the blacks saw me with the whites.
I
Because the
think that
blacks
summarizes.
are more privileged and the whites saw me as not so privileged.
Wow, this is just phenomenal, Preeti.
Correct. Yeah.
And that is, I remember it leaving eventually I did step out of that conversation because the conversation was so volatile between the two parties that being in the firing line was not going to help me. But my takeaway since then has been that we stand on we are a blurry color. We stand on blurry ground. Nilima, I don't think this is called intersectionality.
It's not.
It's not.
But it is the
not.
intersection of a
It's,
reality.
it's not intersectionality. You know, it's very, very interesting that you're saying this, Preeti, because when we have developed the face-to-face program, no? We do some work with masks.
Mm.
We work almost a whole day, sometimes day and a half, with black masks and white masks, and how in the interaction between the blacks and the white masks, the brown masks start developing.
Mm.
And the plight of the brown masks is really, really poignant. Yeah, and it's very interesting what you're saying. And then, you know, that's really when the work starts. Now, when you recognize where you are and what the potentials are, but how these potentials get buried behind the me versus you.
Right.
Right, because the Western paradigms are only me versus you paradigms. They're only binary paradigms.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to understand or accept something beyond the binary. And this is very, very interesting because then we are in a position where we could create a bridge, but we're also at the point where these two, you know, really clash against each other. And there is so much hate in these two, right? One with fear, the other with envy and fear and hate and all of that going on. And how do you deal with it, right? And what we found with the Browns was an internalization of both.
Mm.
So there's a lot of self-hate, which doesn't allow you to really look at yourself honestly. Plus the need, you know, you can pass off, like you're saying, nah? Sometimes it's a great privilege for people to think that you're white, but inside you, you're not. So this comes through very poignantly in the workshop. And what you're saying is really, you know, I'm lucky I wasn't there, Preeti. Or I would have loved to be with you out there. A few of us, if we had been with you, it might have been interesting.
Well, it actually defined my life's work. That defined my life's work because there were many things that happened in that moment. One was for me to recognize, which part of me is white, which is black, and which is brown? And how do I flex to suit my needs, circumstances, desires, aspirations? And when am I ready to stand in my original shoes? And that was a big question for me, because just a little before that, I had traveled to Zimbabwe. I used to work for the Tatas as well at that time, and I used to go every month to Zimbabwe with a group of men who were from Tamil Nadu. So skin color was essentially very brown. And every time we reached Zimbabwe, the senior immigration officer would rush ahead to welcome me. And I was one junior kid on the block at that time, and usher me in and leave my senior, so to say, bosses and standing right there were in the long queue. And I remember the first time not recognizing and understanding that it was my skin color. But it happened the second time. I asked him, I said, why did you come and get me? I thought because I was the only woman. And he said, oh, madam, it's for people like you. And I said, well, you know, I showed him my passport. I said, I'm Indian. I am not white. It didn't change his mind. He still continued. Because in his mind, there was this whole idea that white is better than black, and brown, of course, does not exist. And thus I had that privilege. And then this incident happened. And the reason I say it defined my life's work, further to saying it defined my identity, is that it is that same aspect of colonization where we don't claim who we truly are. We let the circumstances and the ecosystem play with us and say, we show up, whatever. So sometimes I will show up as, all right, I have the privilege, I can walk through a queue without and therein started the journey of deeply claiming my own identity.
Brilliant.
And thus our color is a blurry color, because we have to find a way to say, I'm not white and I'm not black and I am brown and I'm okay being brown. And what does that mean to me and how do I define it? Raghu, there's a question that's coming up for me, which you had shared with me 4-5 years back, and I've used that over and over again. We'd spoken about upper dharma.
Oh, yes.
Speak about that, Raghu. I think it would really benefit us, given that these are the principles of life that we are, we're not defining the idea of faith, because that's not where we come from. We are practitioners of principles, and that is what our, so to speak, our way of living and our path is.
Yeah. Geetika, there was some message that you put in. I'd rather you people don't put in messages, but come out and ask or something like that, because otherwise it's very disturbing. Huh? So if you have something, stop and ask. There's no problem. Okay, this is not such a formal thing. And if it becomes very formal, I'll freeze anyway. So yeah, so just go ahead, ask questions if you need. I'll just answer this one and then. No, actually, what you're asking, Preeti, is a very, very critical thing. Huh? I've written about it in a couple of articles. I don't know where it is now. See, the idea of dharma has to be first understood. So the idea of dharma is actually a question that one asks oneself. It is not an injunction from the outside. And the question is what I'm doing enlivening me, my immediate context, and the larger world we live in simultaneously? Yeah, I hear some people saying, oh, I've made enough money for 3 generations. Now I can come and do dharma. That is not dharma. Because the way you made your money is a big question. Did it really enliven you and the world and other people around you simultaneously, or did you extract to make that money? Yeah, so what is dharma is very important. Otherwise, that also is very, very differently interpreted. And when you translate it into English, it completely loses its meaning. People use words like law and this and that, and there cannot be a law, which actually poses a question for me to wonder about, for me to ponder about. So at every point of time, every step I take, I have to ask myself, am I really enlivening myself, my immediate context, and my world? That is dharmic conduct. Yeah, and if you really understand this, you'll get in touch with the deep interdependence of all human beings. And you cannot but think of yourself as a human being first, as part of an ecological context first. On top of which there are all kinds of differences. Now, somebody might be born in Africa, somebody else somewhere else. It doesn't really matter if I really understand the context of this question. Yeah. Now, one of the ideas which is there in our tradition is what Preeti is referring to, which is called Apad Dharma, which says that when there are very difficult circumstances, yeah, do things that don't threaten your life. Yeah, don't do things that are irrevocable steps of violence. So what we have learned to do as Indians is when we said, okay, yeah, I'm going to be very clear now. I'm not going to be very politically correct or wrong, whatever. So when somebody says you convert or I'm going to kill you, Apat Dharma says, hey, take a step back. There is lots that you have to conserve. There is a beautiful culture that you have. Don't just give your life up. Okay. If you want to look up this idea, Ashish Nandi has written about it in a book called The Intimate Enemy. It's a very beautiful incident he talks about. He talks about how Cortez or Pizarro, whoever it was, took over South America, where he invited the high priests of the place, who were also the kings, for a dinner. And once they came into his place, he promised them that there'll be no arms, whatever. But the moment they stepped into the Spanish space, they were surrounded by people with guns, and they were told, give up this, give up that, or else. And these people refused, and they were just slaughtered. So he says the same context, if a set of Indian leaders, priests and all had gone, they'd have said, yeah, okay, accepted it. And he says very soon, whatever the oppressors were bringing in would soon start looking like a Hindu form. Yeah. Now, the big problem here is that in a context where the Apat Dharma means, Apat Kala means times which are very difficult, times which are dangerous. Yeah. When you have a generally peaceful context, the dangerous times go away quickly. Right? They might be there for a year or two and then they go away. But what's happened to us is this has not gone away. It's been around for almost 1,000 years. So we have found ways of doing all kinds of things, and that has defined who we are today, and that has become our dharma. Yeah, I can give you 100 examples of this. Right? One of the things I discovered very interestingly is why Americans can pronounce my name very well. Nobody has a problem pronouncing Raghu. But then they will say all kinds of strange things about Ananthanarayanan. So initially I would laugh it off. After that, I would say, if you can't pronounce it, I don't think you should try. Then I found out they pronounce Raghu properly because there is a sauce that is called Raghu. Yeah. And I know 100 paddies and all of these kind of people, right? Nice name like Padmanabhan becomes Paddy. But Chiksen Chiksen Mihaly doesn't have to do anything about his name. He's not called Chicken or any such thing. But if an Indian had a name like Chiksen Mihaly, I'm sure he'll be called Chicken. And not only will he be called Chicken, he will accept being called Chicken. Yeah? And there are hundreds of examples like this. If anybody is here from Andhra and Telugu people conduct their marriage in the middle of the night. Do you know why? Because if you conducted your marriage in the day, the very high chance that the bride will be taken away and molested. So the muhurta is always at 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. when it's very safe. And all your celebratory songs are sung in a way that you can't make out with your celebratory songs. The same songs in Tamil Nadu and whatever is sung with a celebration. Same thing happens in Kashmir and other places. That's to protect yourself. And now it is called dharma. You know, in Andhra, you have to do it at 3 o'clock. Why? Nobody knows why. But it's this apad dharma. And it's in so many, 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 many ways. Huh? So many ways we don't even recognize it. Yeah, if anybody is interested, you want to study it a little more, Bala Gangadhara has written about this, about how we have accepted in language, in ways of thinking. Yeah, for example, the idea of left and right, not an Indian idea. There is no such thing as left and right. Because if you look at many of the people, there are some ideas which are right, some ideas which are left. I don't know how many of you have read Ambedkar. Where do you place Ambedkar, left or right? So these kind of divisions, this kind of stuff is just not our way of looking at it. And the problem when you accept this is we use categories to define us, which don't actually define us. Okay, I'll tell you some of the really terrible examples of Apad Dharma I've seen. In consulting, I was consulting with a company once when they called in some foreign consultants to work with them. And I found all the top managers saying yes, yes to whatever was presented, and then doing somersaults to make sure things happened in the right way, but go and present it back in the way it was accepted. So I called the group and I called the CEO and said, look, this is what is happening. What are you up to? Yeah. And I'll tell you very simple examples. Huh? Like there's a set of guys who come quanti. I am a totally, Harvard Business School case studies and so on. Haven't worked for a day in an organization. Some of them were students of mine coming and allowing this stuff about this is the way you must sell, this is that, profitability per unit, all this kind of stuff. And the head of sales is trying desperately to say that is not how we sell in India. We sell in India because we establish relationships. And when we establish relationships, there are ways in which our distributors will help us if things are not going okay. There are so many things that happen in that relationship that can't be defined. But if you start dealing with it like hire and fire, like if you start dealing with it in very, very cold calculating terms, we won't be in business for a day. Okay, same thing with employees. I'm sure Preeti knows about it. Yeah, there's a very close friend of mine who went to Canada. We did a lot of work in India on organization development and people training and all of this. Yeah, he goes to Canada and then he talks to me. He says, look, whatever we did is completely useless here because as head of HR of Walmart in Canada, all that he's doing is hiring and firing and a few things like this and that, adjusting pay scales, and that's it. He says they talk about DEI, they talk about culture, nothing happens here. Because you don't have to worry. You're just selling things and making sure people listen to you. If they don't, they're out. Yeah. So all this is part of Apad Dharma. When a set of top managers will accept things that they know are wrong, but they won't speak up and try really, really hard to, in spite of all of this, try to make things happen. Yeah, I can give you so many examples like this. So Apad Dharma is what is now being looked at as Dharma. What Gandhiji did was use Apad Dharma brilliantly, but we've got stuck with it. Because I really think he was very smart. Because at that time, if we had stood up and thrown bombs all over the place, we'd probably have got slaughtered by our own people, by the way, like it happened in Jallianwala Bagh. But he brought in an idea of saying, look, I'm going to resist you. I'm going to use passive resistance and morally question you, which is very powerful at that time. But it has not redefined the dharma in a way that will make us progress. So we are celebrating, we don't use the word satyagraha nowadays. We use the word ahimsa. He never used the word ahimsa. He used the word satyagraha. And ahimsa was one of the means. Accepting ahimsa as the key word, if you go into the history of it, is again apad dharma. So it suited the British to sound as though they were very nice people out here. The Bengal famine didn't happen and genocides didn't happen in India, that it was all peaceful and they handed it over nicely, and so on and so forth. So these are very deeply ingrained ideas in us. And that's what we've been working with. Yeah,
Sorry.
Geetika, your question? You had something to say, Preeti?
No, after Geetika. Geetika, go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah, no, I think I was actually just trying to reflect on the possibility that I think it's actually connecting with what you just said about how we somewhere want to pretend like the genocides didn't happen in India, the famine didn't happen in India, and some part of the decolonizing work is almost reclaiming our history. And I think I'm actually trying to understand how much, and I'm not very familiar with the phrase apad dharma, so I will read more on it. So I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it feels like at some point, a trauma response became culture. And then people ended up perpetuating that culture, saying this is culture when it was always a trauma response.
Yeah.
Am I reading that right?
Right.
Yeah.
So if I take it further, Geetika, two things happen in a trauma response. No? One is the Stockholm syndrome, where you start loving the oppressor. Yeah. The other is rage and reactivity. Neither of them helps you to really heal. See? And this is exactly what the third trauma response is: amnesia. So if you work with trauma people, these are the three things that happen. And this is exactly what is happening in India. And what we are trying to work with, which is why we're calling it the difficulty of being dharmic, is what is that dharmic space, which is neither the Stockholm syndrome and lactification of the self, nor is it what we're calling righteous retaliation, nor is it the amnesiac, but understanding all three and reclaiming humanness from all three. Yeah, and we don't think this is just an Indian issue. I think this is a world issue. Yeah, and the oppressor needs it as much as everybody else. Yeah.
May I step in? Nilima here. So I'm waiting for you to share also, therefore, the how. I'm so inspired by 5 years of work, Raghu. We started Truth and Reconciliation in 2020. The three of you in your conversation, Maggie, Preeti, Raghu, you've really set the stage for what is it we are grappling with. And so at some point, the question comes, which is, okay, so now how do we heal, right? How do we heal our histories? This happened, and we have some people facing trauma and responding as a collective in a traumatized way. So how do we begin healing our histories? How do we begin decolonizing ourselves? And you have actually put together a framework, and you've been doing it with a group of people. And I would love to know, what is that framework, and how can we do more of that? Because clearly a whole country needs it at this time. And as you said, a whole world needs it at this time. So would love to hear more on that.
Actually, Geetika's question was a very, very good segue to the framework. Yeah. See, what happened, I'll just take a step back to where we began. Nah? So why did we take a year and a half or so to come up with this framework? Because there were 15 of us or 20 of us, whatever, very keen on understanding decolonization. What would happen was that every time we started something, yeah, supposing I start talking about what I did just now, nah? This Apad Dharma stuff. Though at that time I hadn't, framed it so clearly as Apad Dharma. That happened because of something else. It happened because of a discussion on Black Lives Matter, actually. Yeah. So what would happen is when I start talking about this, either Preeti or Maggie will have, but can you look at this? Now this but can you look at it is actually preventing all of us from examining this particular trauma. Yeah. We don't usually use the word trauma because people get traumatized by this word. I'm hoping this group is okay because it is trauma. Yeah. You don't want to go into the pain, right? It's not very easy. Yeah. So somebody or the other will distract the group and take it into another question that's equally important. Like the simplest question that will come up is, oh, we've been, free for 70 years. Why are you bringing up this? Why are you talking about the British? Why are you doing this? Okay. So after a while, we sat down and we said, what's going on? Okay. And that's when the framework emerged. So the framework goes like this. Now, there is a rage of the colonized. Okay. This is a 2x2, and this is not a Boston consulting 2x2. This is not a binary 2x2. This is a polarity 2x2. Okay. Which means nobody can escape from it. All of it is inside of us. Okay. So one polarity is the rage of being colonized. And the other end of the polarity is the urge to heal from the trauma. Yeah. Then the other polarity, people can just draw this if you have a piece of paper with you and pen. The other side of the polarity is looking at the self with shame and looking at the self with pride. Okay, so if you put this together, we'll get what you were talking about, Geetika. When I look at myself with shame and the rage of being colonized, that's when the Stockholm Syndrome takes over. And if any of you have read Frantz Fanon, that's the black skin, white mask space. So I want to lactify myself. I hate who I am. I have hate, great envy of the West, and all of that. But none of these is wrong or totally bad, because we need to also look at what we are doing as browns and blacks. It's not that we should not compare ourselves with a different civilization to understand who we are. But when we look at it through the lens of shame, we only look at ourselves as unworthy, and there's a lot of self-loathing. And therefore, there's a great need to become the other. Okay, so if you go back, look at Indian literature, if you look at Indian freedom fighters, many of them were playing this game. Okay, Raja Ram Mohan Roy is one who stands out, like out there. Yeah. And then you have this other space where there is pride and rage. And this translates into the righteousness. And everything happened in India. We are the greatest. Anything that comes from the West is bad. It has to be put down. And there's a reverse kind of oppression out here. Now, the good thing here is that you're willing to act on your rage and not suppress it. You're willing to own up to your anger. And this is where Gandhiji had to make use of this, I guess, as passive aggression. But if it's not taken into its developmental phase of actually understanding this rage, understanding how to express it, but how to express it not from hate, but from genuine pride, because otherwise pride becomes arrogance. Yeah. Now, when you want to heal and you're holding yourself in shame, you get into this amnesia process, right? Most NGOs do this. They go in there, they very nicely tell you, yeah, we understand you, but please learn English, please become white, that's the way out, and so on. Yeah. So the other quadrant is what we are calling the quadrant of healing and dharma, where there is honest pride, there's a wish to heal, and you can really anchor yourself here. And anchoring here means to really understand that all these three and the fourth is in me. The moment you start othering, you cannot heal. Yeah. The other very interesting thing we found when we were working was being brown. No, that's why Preeti's story was so evocative for me. We are both the oppressor and the oppressed. So we initially started talking about being the oppressor. And then there were people in the group who said, hey, man, you know what? You guys are the oppressors for me. That, I think, is why most educated Indians do not want to look at this problem carefully, look at their identity carefully, because if I have to look at it, I have to own up to how I'm seen as an oppressor by other people in India. I may not wish to be an oppressor. Yeah, exactly what Preeti was saying. They will look at me as white. If I'm educated, if I know Sanskrit, I'm the oppressor. I might have done like I have, 5 years of work with Dalit communities. But just because my name is Raghu Ananthanarayanan, which is clearly Brahmin, South Indian, I must be the oppressor. So can I own it up and say, yeah, man, I mean, let's dialogue it. Let's see how I am being oppressive. I may not intend to be oppressive. How am I being oppressive? So there are actually 8 spaces to look at. So when I'm able to look at all of them and we work through it, it's not possible to do it intellectually. So we work with it experientially over a whole week. Even 1 week is not really enough, but it gets you started and it gets you working with yourself. Yeah. And one of the things we are finding, Nilima, is, I've been trying to do these labs now for God knows how long, 20 years or something. I put it up first, it's called Sadbhavana Lab. So many people said, wow, huh? But they don't sign up because they know how difficult it is. So this is not that easy. This work is not that easy. Yeah. So what we know is how to work with 15, 20 people at a time. And don't ask me this scale up question. Yeah, we don't know how to scale it up.
And if I may come in, Raghu. So, Nilima, to your question, like Raghu said, there is no like a formal answer or a way or a real guide. It's very experiential. That's why we go through this manthan, this lab, which is we feel it in our body, we feel these emotions, we understand where we have stored this shame, the rage, the confusion, the sometimes just the complete amnesia, the absence of feeling, Only when we feel all of this, the right response emerges, and the right response is different. That's why it's a difficulty of being dharmic. Dharma is a word that defines the context, right? Depending on the context, depending on who I am, depending on what my role is, it is going to be different for me. So these labs, that way we work and we get to the essence of it, so that we are in touch with that essence and we are able to bring out, hopefully we're able to get closer to the right response as we go through in life. And talking of names, I know my name shows up as Maggie because I've logged in from an email that I hardly use, so I have not changed it there. But, last almost for a year, I introduced myself as Maragatavalli. I don't go by Maggie anymore. I put my name there. And what I'm seeing is the world responds back to me. Suddenly, I'm not seeing people going, what? What did you say? They try to repeat. And I see that there is more acceptance than what I initially imagined. I thought, okay, this is going to be, for 20 odd years, I thought Maragathali is a difficult name for people to pronounce, but no, it's not. And people are pronouncing it.
See, that's an example of Apat Dharma. Being nice to other people. Maybe they cannot pronounce Maragatavalli properly. So let me be nice to them and call myself Maggie, even if I am not Maggie, I'm Maragatavalli.
Preeti, you were saying something?
I was just saying to Raghu, in fact, a question for Raghu, that I understand that this is not a framework that we can intentionally scale, and yet it's a framework that we can intentionally adopt internally. And as we change and as we become different, the possibility of us then cascading that awareness to those around us heightens. But what is, and we know the answer, but it's important for us to hear this from you as the person who's designed the framework, Raghu, is one, what is that you'd like to see? How would you like there to be no difficulty of dharma? Where would you like us to reach? And I know this might be a very, a question that speaks to a reality that's still emerging. But let's visualize it for a moment and say, what might that look like?
See, 5 years back, it might have been easier to answer this, Preeti. But two things. One, one of my dreams is that 108 people really understand how to teach this. Because I think this can only be cascaded in that way, no?
Yeah.
It's not an intellectual framework. Yeah. And the second thing is, one of the answers to this question, Preeti, is actually very, very simple. Yeah. If the world ends war, a whole, there'll be a complete change, because after the Ukraine war, the spending in defense has gone up 3 to 4 times across the world. It was always high. Direct spending from 5%, 4% of GDP has gone up now to 15 and all of that. Where does the money come from? It comes from education budgets, comes from health budgets, and things like this, right? And this has been written about, a lot of economists, Sachs, this guy, what's his name? Jeffrey Sachs, or whoever it is. He's done some work on this, that world hunger, world education, all that can be ended like this the moment you stop spending on war. Yeah. And it's actually not that difficult to imagine, because I don't know, if any of you want to feel depressed, there's a very good book. This book is called The Nutmeg's Curse. Yeah. And it talks about how trade became gunboat diplomacy. Okay, nutmeg is a little thing, jatika, jadi. I don't know, how do you say that in Tamil?
Jadika is what is, yeah. In Tamil
Jadikai.
is Jadika, right?
But Hindi there must be a name, no? For that, it's a small little thing. It was used to preserve food. And the Dutch East India Company was trading with it with a small island of Indonesia. And there was competition in Europe between the different traders. So the Dutch East India Company decided that they have to get monopoly over it. They were not sure how dialogue would happen. So they came ready for shooting people down if they didn't agree. There was something that happened, that place got slaughtered. Everybody got killed. The locals ran away to the hills, and plantations started. These people took over their places and plantations started. After I read that, I was saying, hey man, if there had been honest trade, okay, if big honest trade, the whole world will be different. So it's not as though the solutions cannot be imagined, right? But the path to these solutions is extremely difficult, because the current valorization is for individualism, competition, extraction. All the great heroes of the world today are all extractors. Yeah, people are valorized for building wealth in very, very questionable ways. So this is where the problem lies. And, even diversity, for instance, I don't think any diversity problem will work. Because if you can help people to be human, it'll automatically there won't be any diversity problem. But when you work with diversity problems, I think, and I know, for instance, from different places, that it actually makes things worse. I start being conscious of who I am. I start being conscious of who you are, and try to, work some idea out of being patronizing, nice to you. I don't know what happens. Right? Whereas teaching people to be human and appreciate differences and value differences will just completely change the scene. But when you valorize competition, when you valorize individual success, which is exactly the opposite of really appreciating people's differences and who each person is as a human being, how do you make the shift? And yet there are so many examples of organizations where these shifts have been made and how they outperform everybody else. And lots of examples. Yeah. But it's not taking root.
Yeah. At the corporate level, there were two articles that I read today. One is about Google and about the toxic culture and what's happening there, which is actually quite alarming. If any of you are interested, I'll pull it out and send it to you. And the other was how Microsoft has dispensed its D&I team. And while I completely agree that focus on diversity is not going to create inclusion, but it's a part of that whole truth and reconciliation cycle where we understand that the truth is that there is diversity. There's no denying that. That is our reality. But the reconciliation lies in the idea that we actually have to step in to invoke humanity in ourselves and each other. Without that, it's really not possible. And we're not going to progress as individuals, as institutions, as organizations. We sort of, it's almost like we are, swimming in the same waters without recognizing that nothing has changed. And it's again the same idea of apartharan, that our principles are so murky by the past that we have forgotten the difference between the past and the present. And thus, the future that we attempt to create has such a deep reflection of the past. I mean, sort of, like on a hamster wheel, just circling around and not getting anywhere. And thus, it's critical because before I actually ask you the question that I have in my mind, I can't help but recognize Guru Purnima, and you have 108 teachers of Manthan. There's something to be said for that. 108 is a very specific number.
Yeah.
And for that to be recognized on Guru Purnima in itself is to say that there is some magic being spun, and the 108 has great potential, as we all know from various lenses. So, and this is for Raghu and Maggie. Maggie, you've been through this process with Raghu as a participant now. What has been the shift for you, or what's been the awareness for you in this journey that you've made? And it's been a long one. I mean, it's still more to go, but it's been a while.
It's a continuous process, right? And been just extremely lucky, I should say, to be part of those initial conversations and see that coming into the framework and now working with people to take that forward. One is, for me internally, I'm a lot more rooted where I am. And so one of the things I want to say when we talked about the brown skin, that one of the things that it brings, and especially for me, where in my family, I'm the darkest skinned kid. And you can imagine growing up what that will say to, what kind of things I would hear. Being brown makes you almost want to be the white. So there is this whole thing of I don't belong. There is no sense of belonging because you are dejected by everybody who's whiter than you for not being white. And you're dejected by the blacks also because you're not black enough. So that's the thing brown lives with, this sense of not belonging. So that's really the shift, I would say, in working through this and really understanding, or even like feeling that sense of who I am and where I am rooted. There's still a lot more to go to really understand and reconcile. Even sometimes even the language we speak.
Yeah.
All of us switch to English, and English really cannot capture the essence of who we are. And unfortunately, that's what we are left with among the different languages of India to speak in. So for me, from a very external perspective, yes, I am learning my mother tongue a little bit more better. I'm learning Sanskrit, I'm learning chanting, I'm going deeper into yoga. These are the external reflections of getting in touch with who I am. But internally, the shift really is, accepting, I would say, and having less of wanting to be the white or not wanting to be the black. There is just a lot more ease in how I interact with people now.
Right. And Maggie, this is not my comment is not a reflection on what you're going through, but a reflection from what you've said. It has a bearing on our nervous system.
Of course. Yeah.
As we come into recognizing and owning our identity with both internal and external manifestations, we relax. And when we relax, we operate differently.
Absolutely.
And
You
that's
can be
the
more
place.
creative, you're less defensive, you approach a situation. This is one of the things we keep going back to, not from Shantam.
Right.
And not from an anticipation of anything.
Right.
Right? This this going into a situation from anticipation is the entire problem. That's why the Gita talks about Nishkamya Karma. What is Nishkamya Karma? Yeah. Nishkamya Karma is just being in balance and in complete equanimity when you're going into any situation. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, yeah. There's an expression that comes up for me when you say Shantam is, and I don't have the Hindi word for it, will come. I think it's Dharya, is even in terms of the idea of happiness. We're not in our state of principles, we don't really dwell on happiness.
No.
We talk about inner equanimity, and that's, I'm translating it as Dharya in this moment, but there might be more. Is
No,
that
there are many words. Dhairya is one word. Then there is Santosha.
Santosh? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Which
have a question,
Yeah.
and maybe you can build your conversation into that. In addition to the complexity of upper dharma having become the dharma, there are also levels of consciousness, right? So you want to work with a country or a community to help them achieve truth and reconciliation, heal their history, and decolonize themselves. And each of them is at a different level of consciousness. And at every level of consciousness, there is a valid way of being, and there's a dharmic way of being, and there's a adharmic way of being. So how do you also work with different levels of consciousness, trying to heal the history of a people or a community? Because people are not at the same level of consciousness within that community.
That's exactly why, Nilima, we work with an experiential process. So there are 20 people in the group. There are 20 different levels of consciousness in a sense. No? But because we're going through an experiential process, what they're trying to understand and words that we use after the experience point to a similar reality. Right? And then we actually work with individuals, not to see how an individual can use this understanding in their life. Right? So in the lab itself, there are ways of working with your own context. How do I confront my context? Yeah. And see, the other thing that we need to keep in mind is there is a lot of work that's happening now across the world. Now, decolonizing psychology, history, all of this. But if a person has not understood where they're coming from, that's the lens through which they look at the history. Yeah. So today, you have people who are really trying to reevaluate Indian history. Yeah. They're being, in a sense, in my understanding, cornered by both sides. The blackface, white mask people simply condemn them for giving a different view of history than is official because of the Marxist history context of India. Yeah. The righteous people are trying to use it for their purposes, neither of which actually contributes to understanding the truth. So my sense is some work has to be done with the person, the identity, and helping people to see where am I coming from before they can really, once they get this, they can look at all the history very easily and sift it out, saying who's coming from where. Yeah, so both of this has to happen simultaneously. Yes, there are some excellent papers being written about all of this now, and I'm interested largely in psychology. So what is colonized psychology? Like today, the term we are using is Euro-American frameworks of psychology. Yeah. And many things that are being, quoted as universal are actually not universal. Yeah, there is this famous robber's cave experiment. Now, most people who are in psychology will know it. But look at the way the experiment was conducted. There are two groups of people who are pre-teens, teen kind of thing, taken to this remote place. Neither of them knows that the other group is there. They're given different colors to wear and things like that. Right? And after a week or so, they're brought together in competitive games. And now it has come out that the people who were helping the researcher actually set up contexts in which they would look at each other in antagonistic ways. It was not an honest experiment even. But even given if it's an honest experiment, he proves that, you know what, this antagonism and you versus me is a universal thing, to put it very short. But take a step back. You're taking kids from a context that already valorizes only individualism and success. You put them through an experience which is competitive. What else will you get except this answer? So it's a completely flawed experiment. It's an experiment which is already coming from a bias that the world is a dangerous place. And by the way, this famous thing of Maslow's hierarchy, there's a lot of evidence coming now that 2-3 years he spent with the Blackfoot or some tribe, and he found that their ways of dealing with each other was not this hierarchy. But he was afraid to talk about it in the academic context, so he suppressed this knowledge. So even at the root of it, many of these experiments are biased. See, that's how deep this colonizing process goes, because there's a huge amount of, politics and commercial stuff behind floating these ideas. These are not innocent ideas. It is so important for a person who's oppressing to be told that the oppressor doesn't have a soul. Otherwise, how do you oppress with a clean conscience and go home? Yeah. So many of the people who were part of Hitler's army, did it honestly believing that they were doing something very good for Germany and that these other people were the vermin and whatever the terms were used, and they had to be cleansed out. So one has to go back. That's why I'm saying I don't know how to deal with it at that level, because that's what is informing politics. Now, just listen to the way people are talking today in America. Just listen to Vivek Ramaswamy. He is frightening. He actually comes out and denies climate change. And a guy with that kind of brains and that kind of intelligence denying climate change with a straight face is such a political statement. So I don't know how to deal with all that, but small groups of people coming together and honestly willing to look at themselves, yeah, we know what to do. Because we're not doing very much. We're just helping them look at themselves and facilitating a process, and it's all there. Because when this kind of colonization is internalized, there is a deep inner anguish. There were people who come to our lab who were holding their parents in such shame because their parents were traditional. And this person wanted to be modern and felt that because she comes from a traditional family, she cannot be modern. But she ended up really appreciating what the parents are going through in holding on to a tradition that they value. So it frees her to accept the beauty of what their parents are doing, accept her need for independence without making it me versus you, and therefore discover how I can be traditional and contemporary at the same time. This tradition versus modernity is a colonial baggage. There has never been tradition versus modernity, science versus spirituality in India, ever. Every change has built upon the other. So now when you internalize this Western thing, you have papers coming out saying Muruga is a tribal god. So poor Margadavalli has to rework her whole thing because she loves Muruga and she also loves Shiva and she also loves somebody else. So the Indian context has said, sure, man, you want to pray to God in the form of Muruga, pray to God in the form of Muruga. That's your culture. That's where you come from. That's perfectly fine. And we've given a larger framework in which to hold all of this. But Western categorization cannot understand this because they only understand monolithic stuff. And they have to look at it as you versus me. So if you're saying Muruga and I'm saying Skanda, or if I'm saying somebody else, you and I are different because I'm using a Sanskrit word to talk about the same fellow. You're using a Tamil word to talk about this chap. So Aryan, Dravidian, all of this. And how many times will it be proven that these are all completely wrong categories? But politically, they're very useful categories. No? So that's the depth at which colonization is impacting us.
That we need research and science to prove that yoga and pranayama work. Right?
Say
So
more?
I'm saying the way colonization works, we need scientific data to prove that pranayama really works on the body.
Yeah. And then it gets called square breathing. No? It's not called pranayama anymore.
Right. Box breathing. Yes. Yeah.
But Nilima, that's a very interesting question in terms of what might be the order of consciousness and how framework step in. And to Raghu's point, what comes up for me is that one is I don't know how we're going to do this work at a systemic level at this stage. I wish we could. I really wish we could. And the second is that we've got to meet every system where it is. And the third, which is really the most alarming point for me, is that systems are by far generally corrupted spaces. Systems are spaces that are run through hierarchy and ego. And that those are the norms. So they are actually infused deeply and upheld, to use Raghu's words, valorized for beating each other, for being competitive, for making sure that they get ahead. Nobody's talking about making sure you don't leave each other behind. Everybody is talking about getting ahead. And thus, systems have systems have for now further enshrined the idea of who's going to be awarded, who's going to be rewarded, who fits in, who belongs, and who we want to include. So it's no longer a matter of diversity anymore.
Yeah.
Not no matter of issue of inclusion. It now is a matter of who I wish to include, if they're aligned with me or not. So it's become upper dharma is now upper dharma into two, because our principles have got even further corrupted because we've so committed to them and we have so indulged them and invested in them. So the order of consciousness in more ways than one, much as we'll have to do the work, we've really got a huge job ahead of us. And my sense is that if we could start with self, that would be a good place to start. And
we at least can make some beginning.
Make some beginning.
Just to add to what Preeti is saying, no? One of the places to start is to start with leadership. Very obviously. But then in my experience, what happens is even leaders turn around and say, yeah, I'm convinced with what you're saying, all that, but I have to run the system. The system runs on ABC basis. So let's take small steps. Right? This baby steps thing in something like this will not work because you're actually talking about an ontology and an epistemology that is a colonizing ontology and epistemology. See, so that is where the difference is. Individuals might be able to reorient, but for a systemic change is very difficult. Now, how do you look at an issue like this now when Musk wants 56 billion for being the CEO? I mean, what does it even mean? Yeah? Right? Which means this one man is demanding more than he pays all his people together. You think he can put together a Tesla car just by sitting on top of it or something like that? Right. And then this is another shocking thing. Huh? I saw, one of these large things when either Musk or this other guy from Amazon is talking, somebody's asking, so what's your next project? So they're saying he wants to go and colonize Mars. Everybody is clapping. And then he says, you know what, I may not succeed, but I'm setting up this transport system, developing these transport systems to Mars. Yeah, I think it's Amazon guy. I use the transport system set up by somebody to create Amazon. So if I do this, yeah, I'm going to be setting up precedents for somebody else. Now, I'm shocked. There was nobody. The interviewer doesn't ask him, so what are you doing? You've gone to America, you wasted a country which was full of forests, where there is less than 5% forest cover in America, real original forest cover. Yeah, America uses 4/5 of the world's resources. We know that we have devastated the world. And you want to run away to Mars. You can't think of using your money to do something else. I was shocked. What shocked me more was everybody was clapping and saying, wow, what a vision.
We make a great deal of effort to enshrine stupidity and then and invest in making our leaders even more delusional. And this is Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, but the fact remains that this happens in every corporate.
Everywhere. Yeah.
And we know they're delusional, and we are going to clap for them for their delusionality, if that's an expression. And then we will aim to become delusional ourselves so that we can be successful, because that's the road, that's the map. So we're drawing to a close, but this conversation doesn't close, right? This is not, it's hard to conclude a conversation like this, but all we can do is pause. And one of the thoughts that's been coming up for me is the map is not the territory. The territory does not define the journey. So to Nilima's point on consciousness, our own idea of the various races we represent, our own Indic heritage, fact that we are a country that is still emerging from the stronghold of colonization, our own personal commitment to change and uphold the principles of Sanatan Dharma, we have our work cut out for us for this lifetime. And a good place to start is with ourselves. I'm very grateful, Nilima, that these conversations happen thanks to your persuasion. You bring us all together. And I would say to everybody who's on this call and to others who listen in later, is to reach out to Raghu and Maggie and me and whoever you believe can connect you to the framework and learn. Learn to sort this inner dilemma out. Learn to claim your identity. And honor that process of change, because the whole idea is to be fulfilled and to be whole. That's the real destination. Thank you so much.
Those are beautiful concluding thoughts, Preeti. Would Raghu and Maggie also just give a one line, and then I would like to say something in a overall perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, thanks a lot for actually, pushing us, nudging us to do this. We have the next lab coming up in August, so this was a really good warm up towards that as we're working towards it. But what this really made me conscious of is how much is left in terms of the journey and the fight, the good fight to get this through. We talked about the scale, we talked about really bringing it in a more systemic manner. So it just reminds me of how much more work is left. Thanks. Raghu?
Actually, I'm still looking at what Preeti said. I think she put it together very beautifully. See, the thing that actually I'm going to ask you something, Nilima. See, I'm an action researcher, right? Because I'm an action researcher, I do my research with people and with organizations. I don't do it in an ivory tower. But that's all I am, yeah. So questions like, how do you scale it up and things like that, I think we need help. We need help from people who understand this whole process of how do you bridge what we are doing with a larger context, right? And, it's not as though we can't do it in that sense, no? But if, some of us who are really working with this take our eyes away from this basic work, right? There is nothing to build on. Yeah, so I'm in touch with, half a dozen researchers who are really doing very, very interesting work in psychology and all that in this area. But all of us are researchers. Yeah, we need help. Yeah, and like, for example, we're doing this lab, no? I'm not a marketing person. I'm asking Margadwali to come and help me with the marketing. I don't know how to market this process. Period. So we really need help from people who understand, who see the importance of this and so on. Because beyond this, what do you want me to do? No?
Yeah, so thank you, Raghu. I think you kind of brought it to where I would have really, it's perfect. As we know, the future requires ecosystems of change. It's not one player or another group, right? We need to put a whole ecosystem together. And the reason we started Truth and Reconciliation work from the inside out, saying it begins with finding those imaginal cells of the new paradigms to come together, right? Each one doing their inner work and being the pindand, who does the inner reconciliation of the whole, so that the Brahmand the macrocosm can somehow mysteriously also get reconciled in the process, right? We will help in pulling together that ecosystem. One idea that's strongly coming to me, just as you mentioned Nazi Germany and exclusion, I saw your 2x2 as a swastik, and I saw it moving. And how do we recover and reclaim and redefine and regenerate it for the new paradigm that becomes truly inclusive, right? So I think
our swastika is the opposite, spins in the opposite direction, Nilima.
Precisely. So that's the transformation, right? That's the flip. Okay. And India today being Guru Purnima, there's a reason Truth and Reconciliation work happens around the week of the full moon of Guru every year. If India wants to be a Vishwa Guru, and we don't want to hold, as Indians, we don't want to hold our Indic identity with shame, but with the heel and the pride space, having integrated the other three spaces, this is it. This is the thought leadership. This is the modeling. This is the loving sharing with the world, having done it from the inside out. So moving from trauma, apata, to dharma, right? And this framework, at a minimum, if we create an ecosystem that just shares it and spreads it as a framework, as a great thought. I mean, this is thought leadership coming out of India from all of you. You know, Raghu, you're leading something very, very powerful and beautiful, and we will help build the ecosystem and coalesce into islands of coherence around it, and hopefully have others then join. I see this work needed in Mexico. Ever since I arrived here, I see the shame and heal space of amnesia, right? Like, no one wants to talk about identity. No one wants to talk about what happened to the Latin Americas, right? I've been so shocked, but now with your framework, I can see it. So I think at a minimum, let's start with a Wikipedia page or something where people just start sharing this framework with each other and building on it as they practice it. So I don't know if it's meant to be, it will be. We're just tapping into something that universal consciousness wants to make happen, right? That is the Indic way. That's the Dharmic way, to enliven what life itself wishes to make happen.
Thanks a lot, Nilima. It's
No,
always very useful to have these conversations. And
I'm so grateful to each one of you, Raghu, Preeti, Maragatavali. It's been amazing. Thank you also to Pavni for joining our Shakti leadership mission as COO. She's kind of helped coordinate many of these sessions, some more coming up